Hello everyone, I'm Vince Kenney, and this is a presentation titled Cybercrime Incorporated. So a little bit about myself. I'm a computer scientist with the Salt Lake City division of the FBI. I've been there for about 8 years now, and over that span of time, I've really seen this ecosystem of cybercrime really grow an awful lot, and we'll talk a little bit more about that throughout this presentation. But it's always really exciting to come to SAINTCON. This is my third time presenting here at SAINTCON. I've attended this since 2015, so it's really great, and I'm excited to be back again. All right, let's dive into it. So the role of cybersecurity in the federal government. If you think of sort of the breakdown and the make of it, there's kind of three different chunks, so to speak. There is the DHS, there is the DOJ, and there is the DOD. And the way I kind of analyze it is if you think of cybercrime or a cyber incident is kind of like a fire. The DHS, they are sort of like the fire department. Their job is to not only help put out the fire, but they actually set up the fire safety codes, and they will work with companies to try and prevent the fire from being started, but also be there to help remediate sort of that fire. While the DOJ, well, if there's a fire that's been started, oftentimes we come in as the police because we're looking for the arson who started that fire. So we come in and we collect evidence, and we try and target that arson, that bad guy that started the fire. And then the DOD, well, that's the military. So if the fire was started by a missile from another country, well, the military is going to get involved, and that's the piece that they'll focus on, is that foreign influence. As far as the makeup of a FBI cyber task force, there are actually a lot of different positions that go into a task force itself. Obviously, there are special agents. They are the case leads. They manage the cases. They work with the victims, and they're ultimately the guys who are, tightening the screws on the bad guys to try and arrest them and put charges on them. There are also task force officers. So we work with a lot of local partners who are really effective at being able to go after different things that might be cumbersome at the federal level. We'll leverage that local partnership. There are also intelligence analysts, so their job is to sort of see the bigger picture and connect the different dots. And then there are a handful of different sort of technical analysis roles, whether it be a computer scientist, a data analyst, a digital operations specialist, staff operations specialist, or an operations support technician. So as I mentioned, we rely very, very heavily on partnerships. So we not only operate as sort of a federal entity, but we also have a number of folks from the Utah Department of Public Safety that work with us, and they're incredibly valuable members to that cyber squad. But we're also always constantly growing. Salt Lake City in general works with a lot of local and state partners, but different divisions around the country, they might be working with Air Force OSI, they might be working with other different types of federal entities. And the FBI's cyber criminal focus. So a cyber squad's kind of split up into two different veins. It has the cyber national security track, which is focused primarily on nation states that are doing the attacks, but then also the FBI has the sort of the criminal focus, which is just general criminal actors that are trying to commit these cyber crimes. And in particular, really over the past couple of years, the FBI has tried very, very hard to focus on identifying those supply chains and disrupting those different key services that make that ecosystem run. So you may have seen some kind of high-profile cyber cases that have come out of the news, whether that be the Quackbot botnet or the Genesis Marketplace or various other different ransomware campaigns. Oftentimes, those different pieces sort of play a role in this ecosystem. Okay, so without further ado, we will go ahead and pivot into the main topic of this discussion, which is organized crime. At the end of the day, this presentation is to kind of just show a lot of the similarities that go into organized crime in general, whether you are dealing with cocaine industry or cartels that sort of deal with drugs, or cyber criminals. And in particular, I'm going to be talking about two very interesting cyber, or rather criminal enterprises. That is the Cali cartel of the 1980s and the 1990s, and the Conti group of the 2020s. All right, so let's start with the Cali cartel. So full disclaimer, probably half of my research on Cali cartel came from that Netflix series Narcos. So if you really want a very, very detailed, very good analysis of the Cali cartel, I would definitely recommend watching that series. But just kind of a general introduction. The Cali cartel, oftentimes the leadership would call themselves the Los Caballeros de Cali, so the gentlemen of Cali, and that's because they kind of operated more like businessmen rather than street thugs. And that was comprised of the Rodriguez brothers and the Santa Cruz family. So their foundations, well, actually kind of how they got their seed money, in a way, is they carried out a rather high-profile criminal kidnapping called Las Chemes, which was basically the kidnapping of an individual out of Switzerland, and they were able to ransom this individual for $700,000. So that was their seed money to get their enterprise up and running. And then they shifted very quickly into the drug trafficking business, because obviously that business had a much higher profit margin, and they could really put those skills of running businesses in place to this drug trafficking business. And then another very key component of the Cali cartel is their expansion into the US. And in particular, they were the kings of New York City. So back in the 70s and 80s, Miami was kind of the big hub for a lot of these cartels, where they would funnel drugs in and things like that. But Cali actually targeted New York City primarily to try and facilitate that type of business there. Okay, so now let's pivot over to the Conti group. So similar in nature, it's these individuals, sort of a band of individuals who sort of came together and formed more or less this Conti ransomware group. So a number of these individuals came from different types of ransomware groups beyond these two that I'm just sort of talking about, but two very important ones that were connected with the Conti group, or an evolution into the Conti group, are Wizard Spider. So you might recognize that threat actor handle as the ones responsible for the TrickBot botnet and the TrickBot malware distribution. So that's more or less a group that is not necessarily doing ransomware, but they are infecting various different computers around the world. That is sort of the seed and the start of a ransomware campaign. And then the second is the Ryuk ransomware campaign. So this is a campaign that started in early August 2018, and it's operated by Russian-speaking individuals. And so that evolved into the Conti group. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about organizational structure. So one of the things that was really interesting to sort of read and analyze about this Conti group is they went all out to structure their organization like a Fortune 500 company. They did a whole bunch of work organizing their leadership. That flowed down to the cocaine production. That flowed down to the transportation and distribution. And one of the things that Cali was exceptionally good at was the money laundering component. Because these guys weren't from the streets, they were from accounting backgrounds, law backgrounds, business backgrounds, effectively. So they did a really good job of money laundering. And of course, they also used their influence with all the money that they received to be able to get the adequate security, and also use corruption as a means to sort of facilitate their business. Now, when we look at the formation of the Conti group, essentially Conti is kind of this band of people that have sort of learned as time has gone on. So a number of the individuals that sort of joined the Conti group cut their teeth, so to speak, just doing sort of the script kidding type of stuff. And it evolved eventually over time into more and more and more sophisticated kind of attacks. But in particular, Conti was a business. They had an HR department. They had all different types of departments that you would see in a normal business. In fact, actually, Something that was kind of interesting that I read out of the Conti leaks was some of the individuals kind of explained, my job's kind of boring. It's sort of your typical cybersecurity job. That's what a number of these individuals just sort of felt they had a little piece in their cybersecurity enterprise. But this was comprised of various different types of technical positions, whether it be a coder, a tester, an administrator, a reverse engineer, or a pen tester. Now, any good organization has a strong or a unique leader. And so in the Cali cartel, the leader was an individual named Gilberto Rodriguez. And so Gilberto Rodriguez was a lawyer, and he was very well known for his strategic acumen in maintaining and the ability to maintain a low profile. So that was kind of one of the fundamental difference from Pablo Escobar, who maintained a really high profile, is Gilberto really focused on trying to maintain a low profile. And his nickname was the chess player. He was always trying to think one or two moves ahead of his competition, of the government, of the US, of his customers. So he played a very central role in organizing the structure of the Cali cartel, and played a very central role in trying to facilitate some of that drug money into legitimate businesses into Colombia. Now, Conti leadership, like I said, it takes a strong head on that snake to be able to make that leadership or make that organization work. And their leadership was run by an individual monikered Stern. So Stern was a well-known Russian cyber criminal, also known as Demon, and he was very, very, very skilled and experienced in cyber criminal types of campaigns. So little is known publicly about Stern, but it's believed that he's kind of in his early 30s and he's based out of Russia. And so at the end of the day, Stern was pretty well known as being a micromanager. he would do as much as possible to really try to drill in and make sure that those campaigns were on time, on budget, and actually had a profit margin so that they would continue to sort of repeat that process. And Stern was pretty ruthless. I think really it goes to show that if you have a kind of a soft leader, it will sort of flow down to softness on the ransomware campaign. But Stern really implemented a lot of very, very malicious and tenacious type of attitude in his organized crime organization. Then the criminal ecosystem. So this is obviously a really important component of just general crime in general, is because that criminal ecosystem really is where is the opportunity and where do people shift and try to actually move to capitalize on that opportunity. And really for the Cali cartel, they had maintained this low profile, and once Pablo Escobar had been sort of taken down or had been arrested, it was time for Cali to kind of move in. And so that downfall of Escobar created kind of a power vacuum where the Cali cartel was able to really expand and kind of move further into their business. They also took advantage of various other different components of their business, but one of the major differences that was very, very different between Cali and Pablo is that Pablo used violence to move things forward. Cali used corruption. So Cali was very, very, very good at facilitating corruption at every single level of their ecosystem to be able to move their business forward. And then, of course, they oftentimes had various different sort of legitimate businesses that they would pivot funds into. And their eventual goal was to actually get out of the drug business and go into a real business. But, of course, that didn't happen in the end. Now, when we flip over and we look at the Conti group, so Conti was started around the beginning-ish of 2020. What happened in 2020? COVID, exactly. That was probably the biggest change in significant dynamics of kind of what happened for various different cybercrime organizations. Is Conti kind of rode that ride of being able to take advantage of the COVID pandemic and this big shift in the use of technology for people at home. But another really interesting thing that actually made a huge big difference for Conti and its effectiveness to continue to run these big high-profile campaigns was the rise of cryptocurrencies. So the Cali cartel, they first got into the drug business through marijuana, and they realized that marijuana didn't make enough money. So then they shifted to cocaine. One of the interesting things is that 5-10 years ago, cryptocurrencies, the value of it and the commonplace of it was kind of like dealing in the marijuana business. But come 2020, and especially 2021 and 2022, the cryptocurrency industry and that component of it transformed ransomware from the marijuana industry into the cocaine industry. It really rose the significant amount of profits that could be made on these various different campaigns. So like I mentioned, the major difference really with Cali and Pablo Escobar was that ability to translate violence into corruption. And boy, did they use that to their maximalist. They infiltrated various different sectors of the Colombian government, whether it be the federal Colombian government, law enforcement, the military, paying off judges, paying off various different individuals. And so they had eyes and ears all over the place to be able to operate that business. So really the major thing that they created was that safe haven. So that safe haven isn't something that Conti created, but if a lot of these folks are in Russia, that obviously created some interesting dynamics of being able to be in sort of a safe haven or in a haven that was very difficult to try and prosecute or thwart these individuals. And the rise of Conti. So the major difference, or really the major thing that Conti was really getting into, was this concept of big game hunting. So Conti really made that component of ransomware really show at the center stage, was that they were able to really use that concept of going after big targets and going after complex cybercrime campaigns to be able to get large payouts. And so they focused on targeting high-value victims, but also victims that were in sort of a high-pressure industry. So whether it be governments, whether it be hospitals, whether it be sort of emergency services, they would go after targets that could pay and targets that needed to pay soon. But they also had a very effective kind of manner of being able to acquire and obtain sophisticated techniques. And of course, they use a lot of those different tactics that ransomware operators now use these days, which is the double and triple extortion kind of methods. However, with all that innovation and all that growth, the Cali cartel and Conti started to get into the crosshairs of not only the US government, but the world. It became pretty apparent that Cali was the new king of cocaine in that New York Times article that I mentioned. And so Cali actually suffered, really in the early 90s, a number of different setbacks through drug seizures. So in 1991, Cali had kind of taken over a large percentage of the movement of drugs out of Colombia into the US, and there was a major seizure that happened called Operation Cornerstone, that the United States was able to seize 12,000 kilograms of cocaine. But there were also subsequent seizures that happened in the years leading up to that. And a lot of those seizures created more stress and pain points in that organization. And so those pain points, oftentimes for law enforcement, are opportunity to be able to try and disrupt and take down those organizations. So Conti is no different. They went after a range of big targets, but even though Conti didn't necessarily, I think there was actually some conversations that Stern was having with some high-level managers in Conti, angry that some of the affiliates were going after hospitals and going after various different critical services. But even still, they went after some big targets. One was the Irish Health Service, and the Irish Health Service basically suffered like a $600 million loss based off of that Conti ransomware incident. Another major one was the fact that Conti attacked the Costa Rican government, and it disrupted government services and caused a number of different economic damage. And then the next big thing that the US government put out is that we put out basically a $10,000 reward on Conti. So we tried to turn the script Mel Gibson style and say, well, how does it feel to be a $10 million lottery ticket? So the U.S. put some heat on, on Conti to be able to try and flip some of those affiliates that maybe felt disgruntled or didn't feel like they were getting paid enough. In theory, they could flip and try to turn in Conti leadership. So the cracks started to form. Like I said, the pressure started to build. And in that pressure buildup, both Conti and Cali experienced the whistleblowers. So a major whistleblower in the Cali cartel was Jorge Salzado. So he was in charge of security for Conti, and he became growingly disillusioned with the Conti cartel and wanted to pivot to more legitimate businesses and felt he kept getting sucked back in and couldn't escape. And there was a turning point where he felt his life and his family's life was threatened, so he decided to flip completely and work with the DEA to try and take down the Cali cartel. Similar in nature, what happened to Conti was the infamous Conti leaks. How many people here remember when the Conti leaks came out? Yeah, so there were a really major leak that came out back in 2021, and it was basically from a former Conti affiliate. And the Conti affiliate said, screw you, Conti, here's everything that's associated with the Conti business and my visibility. And in fact, actually, those Conti leaks really opened up this sort of the eyes of not just the US government, but also just the general public into how one of these cybercrime organizations work. Because so much data, especially chatting and just organizational data, was leaked in those Conti leaks. And now we move on to the fall. So as such, there are a number of things that kind of went into the fall of the Cali cartel. They tried very, very hard to pivot their business into legitimate businesses, but unfortunately for them, and fortunately for the US government, we were able to arrest these individuals. In 1995, the Rodriguez brothers were arrested, only a couple months next to each other. But this was kind of a general victory of trying to take down some of these large organizations. And even though the drug and the cocaine business still exists, it doesn't quite exist in the same king of cocaine and king of drug businesses as it did in years past. It has kind of moved into this sort of unorganized type of space to some degree. And Conti, well, they also had a fall, but actually the fall was somewhat of a self-inflicted fall. So in February 25th of 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine a few weeks prior, and the Conti group basically came in and they pledged allegiance to the Russian government. So as I kind of mentioned in that earlier slide, there is DHS, there's DOJ, and there's DOD. Well, DHS and DOJ were looking at Conti, but once they pledged allegiance to the Russian government, DOD started to get involved. And that meant big trouble for Conti. So this, effectively created a bunch of different constraints that tied Conti's hands many different ways of trying to pledge allegiance to a nation-state group and trying to operate as a business effectively. And this sort of allegiance basically led to the alienation of different affiliates. It made it difficult to recruit anybody, and it made it difficult to continue to use some of their money laundering and some of their cash out techniques to continue that business forward. So in May of 2022, Conti eventually shut down, or at least so they say. It more or less disbanded, I would say, rather than shut down. And this was just kind of an interesting case study to sort of see they really rose through the pandemic, but something as dramatic as just sort of pledging allegiance to a nation state transformed them from being a criminal enterprise to being a nation-state facilitating enterprise. The drug business had a very similar kind of thing that happened in the 80s, 70s and 80s, where some drug organizations were working with communists down in South America, and that kicked off the military's response to try and stop drug organizations. So in conclusion, throughout this presentation, I hope to just shed some light just on the similarities of Conti and Kali. I mean, effectively, they're two illicit businesses trying to make money. They're financially motivated, and they're pretty similar. But there's one major difference that gives me hope to try and disrupt some of these cybercrime organizations. And it's that the victims of Kali's product were willing customers. Yes, drug addicts, individuals taking these things are still victims. It's still illegal activity, but they are willing customers to try and get this type of product. However, the victims of Conti are repulsed by Conti's product, meaning that all those people, all those companies that suffered these ransomware attacks, obviously none of them wanted anything to do with any of this type of activity. And so as a result, I really think that our ability to try and disrupt this type of activity is strengthened by the fact that the victims want just as badly, if not more so, for us to try and disrupt and dismantle some of these organized crime groups. But I think there's another second key weapon that the US government has in this fight against cyber organized crime. And that's you all. So one of the major differences that's just different from organized crime of the Colombian and the cartels of the 1980s and 90s is that was primarily a federal government initiative. There weren't a whole lot of private entities sort of doing this vigilante type of analysis. But really, in kind of the growth of these cybercrime organizations, I cannot tell you how incredibly helpful it is to work with threat researchers, to work with individuals that are reporting this information to the federal government to be able to try and make this disruption happen. So if I were to take that analogy of the three legs of the federal government, whether it be DHS, DOD, or the DOJ, an invisible fourth stool or fourth leg is the US people. So people of the United States have been able to help facilitate those three federal agencies to move forward. So thank you. That's all I have for Cybercrime Incorporated. If you have any questions, feel free to come up and talk to me. I'd love to talk to you about anything that you have that you're doing in this space or that you want to talk about. Thank you. Enjoy the conference.